Hello again. Ray Franz now examines the historical record to clear some of the fog of 1800 years, which fog allows the Watchtower to project that there was a faithful and discreet class continuously existing and feeding the successive generations from the apostles to the days of Charles Taze Russell. Ray says one would think that in the post-apostolic period such a channel would logically be found in the main body of professed Christians rather than in some isolated, fragmented splinter groups separating therefrom. But that main body is what eventually developed into Christendom, which the Watchtower terms apostate. The slave class, therefore, must be found outside that system. Christians then were to be found in a very widespread area of the earth, in many nations and lands, who formed this one and only slave class, this unique collective group, serving as God's sole channel of communication to supply the same spiritual food for the genuine Christians of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries in all those places. The Watchtower Society's publications make no attempt to identify such a channel, offering as a reason that the entrance of apostasy obscured the identification of the faithful and discreet slave class. So, the existence of such a channel during that period is simply assumed. What of the period since, that is, since the 4th century? History is by no means silent on religious developments down through the centuries. It gives us not only a fairly complete picture of the stage-by-stage development of a universal Catholic Church organization, but also the disagreements and separations from that system and the formation of various movements leading up to the Reformation and formation of Protestant denominations, which would have been after the year 1500. Yet in all its records, nothing can be found that would acceptably fit the Watchtower's description of a single, ongoing, faithful and discreet slave class, a homogeneous, close-knit, collective group functioning down through the centuries as the one and only feeding source for generation after generation of all genuine Christians in all places. And it is true, since I've been in the book business for 30 years now, there's an immense amount of historical material covering pretty much all the generations going back to the apostles. It's only willful ignorance that enables the Watchtower to get away with their obfuscation of history. This, I guess the best verb would be pettifoggery when it comes to how God worked during those 18 centuries, all the days since Christ, of course, gave the assurance of Matthew 28:20 that he would be with the church all the days until the end of the world. Ray goes on, the Watchtower makes occasional reference to groups in the Middle Ages, such as the Waldenses, the Lollards, similar groups with at least the implication that they may have been among the genuine Christians of their time, which would make them part of the faithful and discreet slave class. The fact that often these religious fellowships believed such doctrines as the Trinity, the immortality of the soul, and similar doctrines is generally glossed over. Yet the Watchtower Society views these as among the most serious of all false doctrines, as cardinal errors. Furthermore, these fellowships were basically regional, often restricted to one country or at most a few countries. None gives any evidence of serving as a unique channel supplying the same spiritual food to persons on an international scale, something that would be necessary unless we are to assume that all the wheat in the world field was at that time limited to just one or a few countries. Rather than go back several centuries to the time of such groups as the Anabaptists, who recently in Watchtower publications have been presented in such a way that intimates there being a likely link in the chain, why not show a link in the more recent past, that is in the 18th or 19th centuries, when information is far more abundant? Why not show at least those links of the faithful and discreet slave that would connect up with Russell and his founding of the Watchtower Society in 1881? This would be the most logical and obvious starting point from which the chain could then be traced backward. And he has 2 footnotes on this page that we will read. One is about these groups that the Watchtower occasionally refers to. Here's the quote. "It is quite evident that the early Waldenses were faithful witnesses of Jehovah." The evidence apparently being their opposition. This is Ray's comment. The evidence of their being faithful witnesses of Jehovah is apparently their opposition to the Catholic Church's teachings as to saints, purgatory, masses, tradition, papal supremacy, papal pardons and indulgences, and priestly celibacy. Yet, Ray says, that opposition is true of almost all Protestant denominations, which is true. Most Protestants and many Catholics now repudiate many of these medieval teachings of the Catholic Church. So, to claim the Waldenses, according to this logic, as your ancestors spiritually is at least fallacious reasoning, if not downright deceptive. Then they have a second footnote about the Anabaptists, who were the next generation after the early reformers, and sometimes quite violent, by the way, the ancestors now of the Mennonite tradition. And the Watchtower, which Ray cites, that is the November 15th, 1987 Watchtower, pages 21 to 23, discusses these Anabaptists, but the article emphasizes the similarities, and it minimizes the major differences with the witnesses, which can be traced to modern Mennonites and other such small, you might say, ephemeral groups in the larger picture of Christendom. But these people, these denominations, have been around now for 500 years. It's necessary, as Ray sees it, for the Watchtower, of course, to gloss over the differences, because they have to make the story fit their narrative and their interpretation of the faithful discreet slave, which has existed continuously since Pentecost. So as we see, and Ray substantiates here and in the next segment, they have to cherry pick history in the same way they cherry pick scripture. We have a video, by the way, on confirmation bias, which is what the Watchtower habitually is guilty of. If you look in the Daniel series, in the playlist on Daniel, you see one of the latter videos is on the confirmation bias, which causes them to interpret the book of Daniel, as well as other biblical prophecy, by this cherry-picking method. In the next segment, a chain of invisible links.